Hey guys, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning, here tonight to chat about this new Raconteurs album, Help a Stranger. The Raconteurs, Jack White, Jack Lawrence, Patrick Keeler, and Brendan Benson. In the early days of this project, and talking high school, I was super into these guys because more Jack White, yes please. But ever since then, and their early days in general, the Raconteurs have kind of come into their own completely with a completely different style from any of the bands that these guys have kind of come from, whether it be the White Stripes or the Greenhorns or anywhere else. Albums like Consolers of the Lonely back in the day brought in the modern alternative rock sound, but meshed it with alternative rock as well as some alternative country and garage rock, much like the bands that these guys had sort of come from around this time. But of course, it's been quite a friggin' long time since we've heard from the Raconteurs. It's been like 8 years or something like that. Now, going into this album, I really didn't know what to expect, especially with Jack White's brain frequencies. As of lately, that last album of his should not exist, let's just say that. But at the same time, the singles that were coming out of this album did rest my mind a little bit because, while they weren't as adventurous as I maybe had hoped, sounded pretty darn solid. Let's chat about this thing. Album starts off with Bored and Razed, and it's very bluesy, very hard rockin' start, and for the most part, it actually sounds kind of exactly where they left off. It's got a big muscular riff, and actually a surprising amount of attitude to it as well. Hearing this track, compared to whatever the hell Jack White thought was acceptable a few years ago, is astounding within its own right. I just love how triumphant and upbeat this track is, and how genuinely fun it is as well. In a lot of ways, this kind of does come up like a mission statement for this entire album, reminding us very quickly that these four guys very much so still know how to rock. As an intro, I don't have anything bad about this to say at all. No, as a matter of fact, a lot of this album is just Jack and the boys kind of reclaiming their throne. The sort of title track here that we get in Help Me Stranger has only grown on me more and more since I first heard it. It's got a sort of an oddball start, which worried me at first, but it picks up into a very funky electric blues jam. We get some real great harmonies between Jack and Brendan here, and some of the breakdowns here are legitimately fantastic. I mean, sure, you can argue that as far as production goes, this is clean as a whistle and just manufactured for the top 40 alternative rock charts. But it's expertly written, very catchy, and just a great example of the Raconteurs sound. On the other hand, Only Child is a surprisingly emotional ballad. This track is so slow and sappy, it could have very easily been incredibly cheesy. But it strangely ends up being legitimately heartbroken, honestly. It's got that sort of alternative country vibe that we left them off with years ago, but not enough to come off cheesy or take anything away from this. And Jack's vocals here, half the time, he sounds like he's about ready to break down in tears. This is a great sound. Some Days I Don't Feel Like Trying is just another very broken down ballad once again. But it's the sort of tear in your beer blues jam that I feel like they pull off really well. I mean, sure, go into this with an open mind, knowing that the Raconteurs are going back down that old country route that they started down. But it comes off like they've been doing this sound for decades, and the surprisingly heavy chorus is welcome as well. The solo is on point, and for the most part, it is a very true to form blues jam. Not to mention, the repeated mantra towards the end of the track is very positive, and very warm, and very welcomed. Now, there are a few tracks here that are a little too cheesy, sort of the material that I kind of really wish that they strayed away from completely. Take, for example, the Donovan cover, Hey Jip, Dig the Slowness. It's kind of disheartening because if there's one thing that this track has, it's personality. And from an outright bluesy track, this, from miles away, has a lot going for it. But it just kind of comes off like a cover song here. Doesn't have nearly as many interesting layers as the rest of this album. The wailing guitars are brilliant, and Jack's performance is one of his most charismatic here. That's all fine and dandy. But outside of that, a lot of this track is just silly and not nearly as compelling. And Now That You're Gone is just a little too weird for my liking. Apparently, as much as Jack freaked out on his last album a few years back, it wasn't enough, because this is just plain strange. It's a really hard to place tune from start to finish. And it's a shame, because that hook is actually really gold. But these verses are a chore to sit through, and the constant soloing throughout the track is actually pretty obnoxious. And late in the album, What's Yours Is Mine is like the sharpest of sharp left turns. As far as bluesy tunes goes here, this is easily the most abstract and left field track here. Once again, it hops around so much and it's really hard to keep track of. But sadly, it doesn't really come off nearly as exciting as it was intended. No, it just kind of comes off jumbled and a mess. I don't think it's the worst track here, and I think from a distance there are some pretty interesting instrumental moments here. But for me, this really isn't what I tuned in for, but that's just me. But the rest of the album here, it certainly isn't bad, certainly not absolutely adventurous or amazing in these genres, but certainly pretty decent. Don't Bother Me is alright, it's not my favorite track here, and the repeated mantra of the chorus does get a little cornball at times. But I do sort of like the heavier approach to the blues here, and Jack's very manic performance is completely off the rails. Even the harmonies that pop in later on are some of the better ones here. And Shine the Light on Me has actually come full circle. Like the first couple of times I sat through this album, I actually thought this was like the cheesiest track here, especially that intro, and I'm still not really sold on that at all. But once you get past that, this track becomes really interesting, actually. There are a ton of callbacks to Jack White's Blunderbuss album that came out years ago, and it has just about as much personality as you can ask for from these guys. Sunday Driver, though, I genuinely love, and as a matter of fact, it's actually on the stranger side as well. There are some hazy, psychedelic tendencies on this track that do get pretty out there, but it also has the determination of like Jack's early solo stuff or a White Stripes record. No, the highly melodic nature of this track and that big old crunchy riff is just so likable. Plus, the yelps that we get from Jack throughout just is so great to hear him having a little fun that isn't weird. And Live a Lie is like the most textbook Raconteurs track here. But following some of the worst tracks on this album, I honestly feel like listening to this track is like getting a birthday present. It's just such a rowdy, dirty rock tune that just harkens back to their early garage rock days and throwing in a little power pop as well. It is raucous and it is fun. Like, yeah, it may be a little obvious, might be a little straightforward, but I will eat this up any day. And Thoughts and Prayers is actually a pretty stunning finale. Okay, lyrically, this is a little weird and a little goofy even for Jack at this point. But the production here is some of the classiest you're going to hear on this entire album. And as far as like a progressive sound goes for the Raconteurs, I think they absolutely nail it here. The cosmic synths as well as the plucked strings actually complement each other really wonderfully. It just really ends up making me want to hear more from the Raconteurs, and I can't wait to hear what they do next, if they do anything next. So honestly, like, yeah, this may not be the most adventurous or wild or out of control or genre-pushing rock album that you're going to hear this year, but on this album, the Raconteurs come back after 8 years, they rediscover a little rock and roll in their system, they have a little fun, and they make one of the better blues rock and garage rock albums that you're going to hear this year. No, it's not perfect, no, they really don't push outside the box too often, and when they do, yeah, there's a couple of really weird things that go on, and like there's some weird callbacks to the last Jack White album, but outside of that, I'm having a blast with this album. I'm feeling a strong 7 on this, but let me know what you guys think down below. If you liked the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, guys.